Your paycheck says you're earning more than ever. The numbers look good on paper, perhaps a 10 or 15% raise over the past few years. Yet when you stand at the checkout counter, wallet open, something feels fundamentally wrong. The $100 bill that once felt substantial now evaporates before you finish a single shopping trip. This isn't psychology. It's mathematics. And it's reshaping how American families live, spend, and plan for tomorrow. Let's establish our reference point, early 2020, before the world changed. Back then, $100 represented a clear basket of goods and services. It bought a week of groceries for a small family. It covered a modest dinner out. It filled your gas tank with money to spare. That purchasing power became our mental anchor, the standard against which we still measure value today, even as the ground has shifted beneath our feet. Between January 2020 and January 2026, cumulative inflation reshaped the American economic landscape. Prices didn't rise in a smooth line, they surged, plateaued, then crept upward again. The net effect? What cost $100 in early 2020 now demands approximately $122 to purchase. Your $100 bill has lost 18% of its purchasing power. Put another way, that crisp Franklin in your wallet now functions like an $82 bill from 6 years ago. Walk into any American supermarket with $100 and the gap becomes tangible. In 2020, that money filled a cart with staples, proteins, fresh produce, dairy, pantry items, and household basics. Today, the same shopping strategy runs you closer to $130. Your $100 budget forces choices: skip the fresh salmon, buy store-brand cereals, reduce the fruit selection. The cart looks noticeably lighter when you wheel it to the car. Protein costs illuminate the shift with particular clarity. Ground beef that averaged $4 per pound in early 2020 now typically costs between $5.50 and $6.50, a jump of roughly 40 to 60%. Chicken breasts, once the budget-friendly option at $3 per pound, now command $4 to $5. That $100 grocery budget that once included steak and seafood now centers on chicken thighs and eggs, the new calculus of affordable protein. Dining out reveals even starker transformations. $100 once covered dinner for two at a mid-range restaurant, entrees, drinks, appetizer, tip included. Today, that same meal often exceeds $140. Menu prices climb 20 to 30%, but that's only part of the story. Portion sizes quietly shrank. Service charges appeared. Tip expectations shifted from 15 to 20% minimum. Your $100 now buys dinner for two only if you skip cocktails, share an appetizer, and choose carefully. Americans turn to fast food as restaurants price them out, seeking refuge in value menus and combo meals. But the value proposition crumbled there too. A family of four at a quick-service chain once ate well for $30. Today, that same meal, burgers, fries, drinks, approaches $50 or more. Fast food morphed from budget relief to budget strain. Your $100, which once fed the family 3 quick meals out, now barely covers 2. Transportation costs hit Americans where they live, literally. In January 2020, the national average gas price hovered around $2.50 per gallon. $100 filled your tank multiple times or bought about 40 gallons, enough for most Americans to drive 600 miles or more. By 2026, with prices fluctuating between $3.20 and $4 depending on region and season, that $100 buys 25 to 30 gallons. Your driving radius just shrank by a third. Housing expenses tell perhaps the most consequential story. The median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in an American city averaged around $1,000 in 2020. By 2026, that figure climbed to $1,350 or higher in most markets, a 35% surge. For homeowners, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs followed similar trajectories. $100 toward housing in 2020 represented 1/10 of median rent. Today, it represents 7%. Your housing dollar shrank faster than almost anything else. Insurance premiums, auto, home, health became stealth budget killers. Auto insurance costs rose approximately 20 to 30% across most states, driven by higher repair costs, increased accident claims, and rising medical expenses. Health insurance premiums and deductibles climbed relentlessly. $100 that once covered nearly a month of basic auto insurance now covers 3 weeks or less. These fixed costs don't negotiate. They simply extract more from every paycheck, leaving less for discretionary spending. For families with young children, daycare and childcare costs accelerated beyond inflation's pace. The average full-time daycare slot cost roughly $1,200 monthly in 2020. By 2026, that figure reached $1,500 to $1,700 in many areas, increases of 25 to 40%. $100 toward childcare in 2020 covered about 2 days of care. Now it covers 1.5 days at best. Working parents face impossible math: earn more but lose it all to childcare costs. Medical expenses compound the squeeze through multiple channels. Copays that were $25 in 2020 now commonly reach $35 or $40. Prescription medications crept upward, sometimes dramatically. A specialist visit that cost $75 out of pocket now often exceeds $100. That $100 healthcare cushion you kept for emergencies? It now covers 1 urgent care visit, barely, or 2 routine prescriptions. The buffer disappeared precisely when Americans needed it most. Monthly utilities, electric, gas, water, internet rose steadily but unevenly across regions. Electricity costs climbed 15 to 25% in many markets. Internet service, now essential infrastructure, increased 10 to 15% while providing only marginally better service. $100 that comfortably covered your electric bill in 2020 might now fall short in summer's peak air conditioning months. You're not using more power. You're just paying more for the same comfort. Small indulgences tell big stories. That daily coffee run, a $5 habit in 2020, now costs $6.50 to $7 for the same latte in most cities. $100 bought 20 coffee outings in 2020. Today it buys 14 or 15. Multiply this across every small pleasure: the lunch out, the movie ticket, the streaming subscription, the craft beer. Death by 1,000 micro increases. Each one insignificant alone, devastating in aggregate. Entertainment spending reveals shifting priorities. Movie tickets rose from $9 to $12 or $13, a 30 to 40% jump. Streaming services proliferated and raised prices. What was $10 monthly in 2020 now often costs $15 or more per service. $100 of entertainment in 2020 bought multiple experiences: movie nights, streaming services, concerts. Today, you choose 2 streaming services for a month, or 1 concert ticket, or 6 movie tickets. The abundance of choice became the tyranny of choice. Apparel markets split into 2 extremes. Fast fashion remained cheap but quality declined precipitously, garments lasting months instead of years. Mid-range clothing brands raised prices 20 to 30% while often sourcing from the same factories as budget brands. $100 that once bought quality jeans and 2 shirts now buys the jeans alone, or 4 questionable fast fashion pieces that won't survive a season. Americans buy more clothes but own fewer durable items. Here's where the psychological disconnect intensifies. Many Americans did receive raises between 2020 and 2026. Wage growth averaged 3 to 4% annually for much of this period, some years higher, some lower. A worker earning $50,000 in 2020 might now earn $58,000. That's a 16% increase. It sounds significant. It feels like progress. Until you remember prices rose 22%. You're earning more nominal dollars but fewer real ones. This is the mathematical heart of why you feel poorer despite earning more. Real wages, what your paycheck actually buys, declined for most Americans. A 16% nominal wage increase minus 22% inflation equals a 5% real wage decrease. Your purchasing power didn't stagnate. It actively fell. You're not imagining the squeeze. You're experiencing the documented erosion of your economic standing, dressed up in the illusion of raises and promotions. The $100 you managed to save in 2020 sits in your account with the same number attached. But its value evaporated like morning dew. That $100 emergency fund now handles an $82 emergency. Multiply this across every dollar saved. A $10,000 emergency fund from 2020 functions like an $8,200 fund today. Savers, the people who did everything right, watched their prudence punished by forces beyond their control. The American virtue of thrift became a liability. Not all Americans experienced this squeeze equally. Coastal cities and tech hubs saw even steeper increases in housing and services. $100 in San Francisco or New York buys far less than in Des Moines or Tulsa. Yet the gap narrowed as inflation spread inland. Secondary cities that once offered affordable refuge saw their own cost spikes. Geography provided less protection than before. The purchasing power erosion became a national phenomenon, not a coastal problem. Services inflated faster than goods, fundamentally altering American consumption. Haircuts, lawn care, home repairs, auto maintenance, anything requiring human labor, jumped 25 to 40% as wage pressures rippled through service industries. $100 that bought a haircut and oil change in 2020 now covers one or the other. Americans who once outsourced basic tasks increasingly do them themselves. The service economy contracted not from lack of demand but from lack of affordability. The subscription economy that promised convenience became a budget trap. Americans in 2020 juggled perhaps 3 or 4 subscriptions: streaming, music, maybe a meal kit. By 2026, subscription creep infected everything: software, fitness, news, cloud storage, even car features. Each one costs $10 to $20 monthly. $100 that once covered discretionary spending now vanishes into automatic withdrawals before you consciously spend anything. You're paying more to access things you used to own outright. Shrinkflation, reducing product size or quality while maintaining price, became corporate America's silent strategy. Your ice cream container shrank from 64 to 48 ounces. Chip bags contained more air. Toilet paper rolls got narrower. Restaurant portions decreased. You're not getting less value for your $100, you're getting dramatically less product for the same money. The price per unit skyrocketed while headline prices stayed deceptively stable. Companies bet you wouldn't notice or wouldn't care enough to change behavior. Americans adjusted their mental models of value, recalibrating what feels expensive versus cheap. A $20 item that once seemed pricey now feels reasonable. $50 became the new psychological threshold for expensive. A $100 purchase that once demanded careful consideration now happens with a shrug. This mental inflation masks the real problem: you're not becoming more financially comfortable. You're becoming numb to prices that would have shocked you 6 years ago. Normalization of higher costs isn't adaptation, it's surrender. Credit card balances swelled as Americans bridged the gap between stagnant real wages and rising costs. The average American household credit card debt reached new highs, increasing 20 to 30% from 2020 levels. That $100 gap between what you earn and what you need doesn't disappear, it transfers to rotating debt at 18 to 24% annual interest. You're not overspending on luxuries. You're borrowing to maintain a lifestyle that used to fit within your salary. The debt spiral began not from irresponsibility but from mathematical impossibility. Here's where the economic story splits into parallel universes. Americans who owned assets, homes, stocks, investment properties, often saw those assets appreciate faster than inflation. Stock portfolios gained. Home equity soared in many markets. For this group, the $100 purchasing power decline stung but didn't devastate because their net worth climbed. Meanwhile, Americans living paycheck to paycheck, with no assets to appreciate, absorbed the full brunt of inflation with no offsetting gains. Wealth inequality didn't just persist, it accelerated, masked by aggregate statistics. Retirement planning models broke under these conditions. Financial advisors long counseled that $1 million provided secure retirement income. But if $100,000 in annual expenses in 2020 now requires $122,000, and if this trend continues, that $1 million nest egg no longer lasts 30 years, it lasts 24. Americans nearing retirement faced a brutal choice: work longer, spend less, or hope the inflation surge proves temporary. The golden years tarnished before they arrived. Federal Reserve policy grappled with this reality through interest rate adjustments, attempting to cool inflation without triggering recession. But monetary policy operates like a sledgehammer: broad, blunt, slow. It can't distinguish between necessary price corrections and corporate profit-taking. It can't ease rent burdens or reduce childcare costs directly. By the time policy changes filter through to consumer prices, millions of families have already restructured their lives around the new expensive normal. The policy response, however well-intentioned, arrived too late to prevent the pain. Let's build the concrete comparison. In early 2020, $100 bought a full week of groceries for two people, including proteins and fresh produce, or dinner for two at a mid-range restaurant with drinks, or 40 gallons of gas, or 2 streaming services for a month, or a quality pair of jeans, or 4 movie tickets, or 10 specialty coffees, or roughly 8% of median monthly rent. This was the baseline of American middle-class consumption, modest but achievable. Now examine 2026. That same $100 buys 4 days of groceries, not 7, with cheaper protein choices, or dinner for two only if you skip appetizers and cocktails, or 25 to 30 gallons of gas, or 1.5 streaming services, or 1 pair of mid-range jeans, period, or 3 movie tickets, or 14 coffees, or roughly 7% of median rent. Every single category shrank. This isn't selective pessimism, it's comprehensive documentation of purchasing power erosion across the entire spectrum of American household spending. Place these two realities side by side and the visceral impact clarifies. You're not spending frivolously. You're not financially irresponsible. You're simply trying to maintain the same standard of living with a dollar that buys 18% less. Every budget line, food, transportation, housing, entertainment, healthcare, suffered simultaneous reduction. There's no fat left to cut because you already cut it. The feeling of being poorer isn't a feeling. It's an accurate assessment of your objective economic condition. Americans didn't passively accept the squeeze. They adapted with remarkable creativity and grit. They switched to store brands, buying generic where they once bought name brand. They consolidated trips to save gas. They canceled subscriptions and rotated between services. They cooked at home more, learning skills their parents knew but they'd outsourced. They shopped sales aggressively, using apps to track prices. They bought used instead of new. They shared accounts and resources with friends and family. Adaptation became survival. Communities developed mutual aid systems that previous generations would recognize. Food sharing programs expanded. Buy Nothing groups proliferated on social media. Tool libraries emerged, letting neighbors borrow equipment instead of buying. Childcare co-ops formed among trusted parent networks. These weren't poverty measures, they were middle-class families acknowledging that the individual household model no longer stretched far enough. Americans rediscovered that pooling resources isn't failure. It's intelligent adaptation to changed conditions. There's strength in shared struggle. Economic pressure sparked a skills renaissance. YouTube became America's free university for practical knowledge. People learned to change their own oil, cut their own hair, repair their own appliances, grow their own vegetables. Skills that seemed obsolete, sewing, basic carpentry, home canning, returned to relevance. Every skill learned represented dollars saved and autonomy reclaimed. This wasn't romantic homesteading. It was pragmatic economics. But in reclaiming these capabilities, Americans also reclaimed confidence and competence that consumer culture had eroded. Younger Americans, those entering the workforce during this period, developed fundamentally different economic expectations than their predecessors. They witnessed their parents' raises evaporate to inflation. They watched homeownership drift further from reach despite doing everything right. They understood that $100 today won't be $100 tomorrow. This shaped their choices, prioritizing flexibility over stability, experiences over possessions, financial literacy over blind optimism. They're not entitled or lazy. They're rationally responding to an economy that changed its rules midstream. Hardship revealed unexpected benefits. Families ate together more often, home-cooked meals replacing restaurant outings. People walked and biked instead of driving, improving health while saving money. Communities grew tighter as neighbors helped neighbors. The relentless consumerism that defined American culture for decades began to crack. People questioned whether they needed everything they'd been sold. Minimalism shifted from lifestyle trend to economic necessity to, for some, genuine philosophy. Constraint forced clarity about what truly matters. The purchasing power crisis sparked mass financial education. Americans who previously ignored economics suddenly tracked inflation data. Personal finance content exploded across platforms. People learned about real versus nominal wages, purchasing power parity, hedonic adjustment. They understood that their paycheck number mattered less than what it bought. Financial literacy ceased being optional knowledge for enthusiasts and became survival skill for everyone. This awakening won't reverse immediately when conditions improve, it's a permanent mindset shift. Economic pressure pushed many Americans toward entrepreneurship. Side hustles proliferated not as passion projects but as mathematical necessities. People monetized skills, sold crafts, offered services, created content. The gig economy expanded, though not always by choice. But within this survival entrepreneurship, some discovered genuine opportunities. They built businesses addressing the new economic reality: budget services, repair shops, educational platforms. Crisis didn't just destroy old economic patterns. It created space for new ones to emerge. The lived experience of purchasing power erosion shifted political discourse. Voters across the spectrum demanded policies addressing real wage stagnation, housing costs, healthcare expenses. The abstract economics of Federal Reserve meetings became kitchen table issues. Politicians who once discussed inflation in technical terms now faced constituents who could detail exactly how it devastated family budgets. This democratic accountability matters. When enough Americans understand the mechanics of their economic pain, they demand meaningful response. Awareness precedes change. This crisis exposed flaws in how we measure economic health. GDP growth continued even as families struggled. Unemployment stayed low while real wages fell. Stock markets reached records while purchasing power declined. The disconnect between official metrics and lived experience grew undeniable. Americans learned that aggregate statistics mask individual realities. A healthy economy on paper can still devastate millions in practice. The question isn't just how to fix purchasing power, it's how to measure economic well-being in ways that reflect actual human experience. So where does this leave that $100 bill in your wallet? It's not returning to its 2020 purchasing power. Inflation rarely reverses completely. But awareness arms you with power. You now understand that feeling poorer despite earning more isn't personal failure. You can make informed decisions about spending, saving, and earning. You can advocate for policies addressing root causes. You can build resilience through skills, community, and financial literacy. The $100 may buy less, but your knowledge of why it buys less makes you richer in ways that matter. Economic conditions cycle. Purchasing power can recover through wage growth, productivity gains, policy changes, and market corrections. The Americans who emerged from previous economic disruptions, the Great Depression, the stagflation 70s, the 2008 crisis, didn't just survive. They built new frameworks for prosperity. You're living through your generation's economic defining moment. The adaptations you're making now, the skills learned, the communities built, the financial literacy gained, these become permanent advantages. Your $100 might feel like $50 today. But the resilience you're building is worth far more than any denomination.